The atmosphere inside the House Judiciary Committee hearing room shifted the moment Congressman Ted Lieu, normally calm, analytical, and careful with his words, adjusted his glasses and leaned toward his microphone. His tone carried an unusual sharpness, enough to pull the attention of staffers away from their screens. "With respect to my colleague from Texas," Lieu began, locking eyes with Representative Jasmine Crockett on the opposite side of the dais, "I have major reservations about the direction being suggested here. And before we move forward, I think it's fair for us to ask whether Representative Crockett has the level of legal expertise required to guide this initiative." An uncomfortable hush spread across the room. Members glanced at one another, visibly taken aback by such a direct public challenge between two members of the same party. Chairman Jim Jordan leaned back in his chair with a faintly amused expression. Pleased to watch Democratic lawmakers put strain on their own unity without any help from Republicans. Crockett, the freshman Democrat from Texas, barely reacted. The only hint of emotion was a slight head tilt and a subtle lift of her eyebrow. While Lieu radiated a controlled intensity, she remained composed as she reached for a leather portfolio resting on the table. "I appreciate Congressman Lieu's interest in my credentials," she replied in a steady, even tone. She slid out a single sheet of paper and placed it neatly on the table. "Perhaps this will clear up any confusion about my background." Those sitting close enough to see the header on the document leaned forward immediately. Ranking Member Jerry Nadler's eyes widened as he realized exactly what Crockett had just presented. Cameras zoomed in on Lieu's face as the confidence in his expression suddenly faltered. Whatever he anticipated from this confrontation, it wasn't the document now lying between them. Before we break down the full story behind this explosive moment shaking up Congress, make sure to subscribe and enable notifications so you never miss our latest political updates. Now, let's look closely at exactly what happened when Ted Lieu questioned Jasmine Crockett's qualifications and how her surprising counter left him and the entire committee stunned into silence. Ted Lieu had built his reputation in Congress on detail-oriented planning and sharp legal thinking. The 55-year-old Democrat from California, now serving his fifth term, was widely respected on both sides of the aisle for his clarity, discipline, and deep knowledge of the law. With an Air Force JAG background and degrees from both Stanford and Georgetown law, he was often described as one of the House's most capable legal strategists. On this particular Tuesday morning, Lieu walked into the Judiciary Committee room with a very specific mission. The committee was reviewing a controversial proposal that would expand the Department of Justice's authority to conduct pattern or practice investigations into local police departments. Normally, Lieu, who supported efforts to strengthen police accountability, might have been sympathetic. But as a former prosecutor and military attorney, he was troubled by what he saw as procedural gaps and unclear implementation plans. In his view, the legal structure behind the proposal needed more scrutiny before moving forward. He wants the policy done right, not just done quickly, his chief of staff had told Democratic leadership earlier in the week. He supports the goals but has big questions about the legal mechanics. What complicated matters further was the fact that the proposal was being championed by one of the least tenured members of the House, Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas, just a year and a half into her first term. At 43, Crockett had already become known as one of the party's boldest and most outspoken newcomers. Before joining Congress, she worked as a civil rights lawyer and later served in the Texas legislature, earning national recognition for her advocacy in cases involving police misconduct and voting rights. Still, Lieu wondered privately whether her experience fully prepared her for designing federal enforcement systems. "She's incredibly smart and passionate," he remarked to a colleague the day before. "But this is complex constitutional material. We need more than strong conviction, we need precision." The stakes surrounding the proposal were enormous. If adopted, the new enforcement structure would change the way federal and local governments interact on police oversight and could influence thousands of police departments across the country. Civil rights organizations praised the proposal as a long overdue update to accountability standards. Police unions argued it amounted to federal interference. For Democrats, the political timing added another layer of difficulty. With midterms approaching and control of the House uncertain, leaders were trying to energize progressive voters without giving Republicans an opportunity to attack them as hostile to law enforcement. Crockett had become the public face of the initiative, appearing on national news shows and writing opinion pieces advocating for its passage. Her experience representing victims of police abuse and her identity as a black woman gave her arguments particular moral and political weight. Representative Crockett brings both legal skill and lived experience to this issue, the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus said the week before. Her voice is exactly what this conversation needs. But in private, some senior Democrats, including Lieu, worried she was prioritizing speed over stability. They feared that if the proposal wasn't written with airtight legal structure, it could collapse under court challenges, weakening its impact even if Congress passed it. The hearing that morning had originally been scheduled to handle detailed technical matters, the kind of procedural discussion typically ignored by the media. But Lieu had decided it was time to raise deeper questions publicly. What he didn't expect was that Crockett knew about his concerns long before the hearing began, and had come prepared. The document she placed before her wasn't just a response. It was a carefully chosen message about who had the expertise, the authority, and the credibility to lead the debate on federal civil rights enforcement. As Jerry Nadler leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "This could get complicated." Cameras captured Crockett's calm, unwavering expression, the look of someone who had been underestimated before and knew exactly how to handle it. The tension in the room wasn't just about a disagreement over policy. It reflected a larger struggle over what kind of experience truly matters: long-established institutional knowledge or new voices shaped by direct engagement with the communities affected. It was a clash between tradition and transformation over who gets to define leadership in the fight for justice and equality. "If I may expand on my concerns," Lieu continued, pressing forward despite Crockett's unexpected reveal, the enforcement structure under debate would significantly reshape how federal agencies interact with local authorities. This wasn't a matter of enthusiasm or political momentum. It was a question of constitutional limits, administrative procedures, and real-world execution. Lieu shifted the papers in front of him, his gaze drifting from time to time toward the document on Crockett's desk, which he still couldn't fully make out. Even with that distraction tugging at his attention, he continued pressing his argument. He said he had gone through Representative Crockett's proposal in depth, and although he respected her commitment, he had serious doubts that the plan fully anticipated the legal challenges it would face once it entered the federal court system. In his words, the issue wasn't partisanship, but the quality of the legal framework itself. The message behind his remarks was unmistakable. Lieu was implying that Crockett, despite her extensive civil rights background, lacked the advanced legal skill required for designing this kind of federal enforcement system. To the public, his comments might have sounded like a dry procedural critique, but within a congressional setting, it amounted to questioning a colleague's professional competence. Throughout Lieu's comments, Crockett remained remarkably steady. She took occasional notes but didn't interrupt or respond with visible irritation. Her patience stood out, especially considering that her qualifications were being challenged on live cameras. Chairman Jordan, clearly enjoying the rare sight of Democrats sparring with one another, recognized Crockett. "The gentlewoman from Texas may respond?" "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," Crockett began, her voice clear and calm, never sounding defensive. She acknowledged Lieu's focus on procedural accuracy and agreed that strong legislation required both moral purpose and legal rigor. She glanced briefly at the document beside her. "But I'm surprised by the implication that I may not have the proper legal foundation for this work." Then, with deliberate care, she lifted the document so cameras could zoom in. "This is the amicus brief I authored in Martinez v. Texas Department of Public Safety. The case that established the constitutional basis for pattern or practice investigations at the state level," she explained. "The Fifth Circuit upheld that framework, and the Supreme Court later cited it favorably. A ripple of surprise spread through the room. The Martinez case was well known. It had shaped the very foundation on which the current proposal rested. But very few committee members had realized Crockett had been involved, let alone that she had authored a major component of the legal argument years. Before she ever ran for Congress, I served as lead counsel for the plaintiffs in that case, she continued, describing her collaboration with the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division to build exactly the kind of enforcement structure now under review. She set the brief back down carefully. The proposal before this committee incorporates lessons directly from that litigation, including solutions to the procedural issues Congressman Lieu has raised. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. What started as a senior lawmaker casting doubt on a junior member's qualifications had evolved into a reminder that time in Congress doesn't always equal subject matter expertise. Lieu, to his credit, adjusted quickly. "I'm familiar with the Martinez ruling, Representative Crockett," he admitted. "It was truly significant. I wasn't aware you were involved in it." "That may be part of the challenge," Crockett replied, not boastful but direct. "There seems to be an assumption that newer members couldn't possibly have professional experience that predates their time in Congress." She opened the brief to another section. "Now, regarding your procedural concerns, if you look at page 47 of my proposal, you'll see provisions drafted specifically to withstand the Supreme Court's recent rulings in Thompson and Blackwell, which narrowed federal involvement in local policing." Committee members, including several Republicans, turned to the page she referenced. Crockett continued, noting that those provisions were shaped by Justice Roberts's concurrence in Thompson, where he outlined a narrower but constitutionally acceptable route for federal oversight that avoided triggering federalism issues. Representative Matt Gaetz attempted to interrupt. "Point of parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Chairman. Are we watching a moot court debate or discussing real policy?" But the moment fell flat. Members from both parties were now too engaged in the legal depth of the conversation to entertain theatrics. "If I may continue," Crockett said smoothly. She explained that Lieu's concerns about administrative procedure were valid, and that Section 4B of the proposal addressed them through a three-stage review process required before any pattern or practice investigation could advance. She then looked directly at Lieu. "This structure was inspired by the oversight model you implemented during your military justice work as a JAG officer. I've always respected how that system balances procedural integrity with accountability." Her acknowledgement of Lieu's background was a strategic and respectful shift, showing she both understood and valued his expertise, even as she demonstrated her own. Chairman Jordan, disappointed that the expected internal conflict was turning into a high-level legal exchange, tried to interject by steering the conversation toward political considerations. Crockett cut in, still respectful but firm. "Mr. Chairman, the legal framework is not separate from the political reality. If a policy collapses in court, it doesn't matter how inspiring it sounds. It becomes an empty promise to communities waiting for meaningful progress." She turned again to Lieu. "I believe that's exactly the core of your concern, and it's one I share. The difference is that I built these considerations into the proposal from the very beginning, rather than treating them as secondary." Lieu, now clearly reassessing his earlier assumptions, leaned into his microphone. "Representative Crockett, it's clear you've given this far more comprehensive thought than I initially understood." Then he added, "I wonder if you could expand on how your experience in the Martinez case shapes the proposal's approach to qualified immunity, which remains a major obstacle." Lieu's question marked a quiet but meaningful shift from doubting Crockett's qualifications to genuinely engaging with the depth of her experience. The atmosphere inside the hearing room reflected this change. What had been tense and confrontational only moments earlier had turned into a thoughtful legal exchange. Crockett recognized the importance of that shift and nodded. "That's exactly the right line of inquiry, Congressman," she said. She explained that in the Martinez case, her legal team encountered qualified immunity as a major obstacle in individual claims. But they also discovered that broad pattern or practice investigations could bypass that barrier when Systemic failings were clearly documented. She withdrew another document from her portfolio. This statistical breakdown from Martinez demonstrates how establishing recurring patterns created accountability even in situations where qualified immunity blocked individual misconduct. Claims, she said. A committee aide stepped forward to distribute copies to members. As representatives began scanning the data, Crockett continued, "The proposal before us builds on that model by creating what I call pattern gateways. These allow us to pursue systemic accountability while staying within the Supreme Court's current interpretation of qualified immunity in single officer cases." The discussion between Lieu and Crockett grew increasingly detailed as the minutes passed. Lieu asked deeper, more technical questions, and Crockett answered each one with clarity and confidence. A hearing that began with doubts about credentials had transformed into one of the most substantive legal exchanges the committee had seen in quite some time. Representative Zoe Lofgren, a long-serving Democrat with extensive legal experience, eventually spoke up. "Mr. Chairman, this is exactly the type of informed policy development the public expects from Congress. Representative Crockett has clearly done exceptional work." As the cameras swept across the room, expressions had noticeably shifted. Where skepticism and political amusement once sat, members now showed genuine interest. Even several Republicans who had initially enjoyed the internal Democratic friction now appeared absorbed in the legal details. Crockett remained composed and steady, but it was clear she now carried a quiet authority that permeated the room. Instead of escalating tension, the exchange had raised the level of discourse, leaving even the chairman briefly uncertain about how to steer the conversation next. As the hearing reached its midpoint, Lieu's initial challenge to Crockett's qualifications had evolved into something rarely seen in Washington: a serious, substantive policy discussion between two knowledgeable lawmakers. Chairman Jordan, increasingly irritated that the partisan conflict he anticipated had instead become a showcase of Democratic legal expertise, tried to steer things back to a political narrative. "While this legal seminar is interesting, we need to refocus on the troubling expansion of federal authority that this proposal represents," he said. Crockett, who had spent the entire discussion grounding her arguments in legal and procedural substance, shifted seamlessly to address Jordan's point. "Mr. Chairman, concerns about federal overreach are precisely why this framework includes strict jurisdictional boundaries and clear local oversight roles," she replied. "Those are the very elements Congressman Lieu emphasized as essential." She flipped a page in her notes. Section 6, for example, prohibits broad federal intervention. It requires specific, documented findings before any investigation can begin. Jordan, clearly caught off guard by her substantive counterargument, shifted in his seat. "The gentleman's time," he began. "Mr. Chairman," Lieu interjected, "I believe I still have 3 minutes remaining, and I'd like to continue this exchange with Representative Crockett." His request marked a significant moment. The lawmaker who had started by questioning Crockett's competency was now insisting on giving her more time to expand on her ideas. Members of the committee and journalists in the room immediately recognized the shift. "Proceed," Jordan said tersely. "Lieu, you leaned forward again. Representative Crockett, your expertise on pattern or practice mechanisms is clear, but I'm still concerned about how this system functions across jurisdictions that vary widely in resources and capacity." This time, Lieu's question was not a challenge, but an invitation to further detail and acknowledgement of Crockett as a peer. "That's an important issue," Crockett responded, reaching for another prepared document. "This is a tiered implementation plan designed specifically to address the differences in resources across police departments." She held up a chart. "There are 3 implementation tracks based on department size, budget, and existing oversight capabilities. Smaller departments get technical support and extended compliance timelines, while larger ones with internal review structures face accelerated requirements." As committee members began reviewing the chart, Crockett added, "This proposal isn't only about enforcement. It's also about strengthening capacity. That's why 40% of allocated funding goes toward helping under-resourced departments build the infrastructure required to meet these standards. Lieu nodded. That answers one of my main concerns. But what about the risk of politically targeted investigations? We saw in the previous administration how easily executive agencies can be misused. Another important point, Crockett replied. If you look at pages 32 through 36, you'll find the creation of a bipartisan review panel that requires a supermajority vote before any investigation can move forward in politically sensitive contexts. She looked directly at Lieu. That safeguard was actually inspired by your 2019 article in the Georgetown Law Journal on preventing political influence within the Justice Department. I cited it in the footnotes. The acknowledgement that Crockett had studied Lieu's academic work and woven it into her proposal had a visible impact on him. The change in his expression was small but impossible to miss. His attitude shifted from that of a senior lawmaker sizing up a junior colleague to that of a peer ready to work together. I didn't realize you had already built those elements in, he said, his voice warmer than before. Crockett replied calmly, your scholarship in this area actually came before either of us even entered Congress. Good ideas shouldn't be limited by seniority or committee roles. With that, the entire tone of the conversation changed. What started as Lieu questioning Crockett's background had now turned into a clear example of how meaningful policy work should happen across experience levels, across different perspectives, and without ego. Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, one of the more senior members on the committee, asked to speak. Mr. Chairman, this is exactly how Congress is supposed to function. Two members with real legal knowledge discussing complex policy issues seriously instead of chasing political headlines. It's refreshing. Several members nodded in agreement. Even a few Republicans who had quietly expected, or maybe even hoped for, a heated clash. Lieu, now fully engaged in collaboration instead of confrontation, turned back to Crockett. I appreciate how carefully you built in these safeguards. Have you thought about how your proposal aligns with the consent decrees already active in various jurisdictions? Crockett didn't hesitate. We've reviewed all 37 active consent decrees, she said, pulling yet another document from her deep stack of materials. This chart shows how the proposed framework strengthens, not replaces, current agreements. We're calling it accountability continuity across different administrations. As the document made its way around the room, Representative Dan Bishop, a Republican from North Carolina, shook his head in reluctant admiration. Mr. Chairman, he said, I disagree with almost every policy goal the gentlewoman from Texas is putting forward. But I can't challenge her preparation or knowledge. This is the most thoroughly built-out legislative proposal I've seen this entire session. This reluctant praise from someone on the opposite side of the political spectrum marked the peak of Crockett's achievement, without raising her voice, showing irritation, or reacting defensively to Lieu's opening challenge. She had proven not only her qualifications, but her deep command of the issue. Chairman Jordan, realizing that his hope for democratic conflict had fallen apart, tried to end the discussion. The gentleman's time has expired. We will, Lieu quickly interrupted. Mr. Chairman, I request unanimous consent for one more minute. Jordan, annoyed but bound by procedure, agreed. Lieu turned to Crockett once more. Representative, I began today questioning whether you were the right person to lead this effort. I was clearly wrong, and I want to say that publicly. A quiet murmur spread across the room. Such open admissions were rare. Lieu continued, your understanding of both the legal foundation and the practical challenges is far beyond what I expected. I'd like to withdraw my earlier concerns and formally ask if you would consider adding me as a co-sponsor. Understanding we may still debate certain details? The room went still at this dramatic shift from open skepticism to an offer of partnership. Crockett's reply was gracious, not boastful. I would welcome your co-sponsorship, Congressman Lieu. Your legal background will strengthen this proposal, and the concerns you raised, real and meaningful, will help make the framework better. As their exchange wrapped up, The entire atmosphere in the hearing room felt different. Crockett hadn't simply answered questions about her credentials. She had moved the conversation past the idea of credential checking entirely, replacing it with clear, demonstrated expertise. Cameras caught Lieu giving a respectful nod and Crockett meeting it with calm confidence. It was a rare moment of genuine substance in modern politics. And it happened because Crockett came prepared to elevate the conversation, not just defend herself. The aftermath of the Lieu-Crockett exchange moved quickly across Washington's political circles. What began as an attempt to sideline a newer member of Congress had turned into one of the most substantive policy discussions seen in a long time. The political effects were immediate. As lawmakers walked out of the hearing room, reporters swarmed both Lieu and Crockett. Their questions reflected how completely the storyline had changed. Instead of asking about the tension at the beginning, journalists wanted details about the legal framework and the new partnership that had formed. A CNN reporter asked Lieu, "Did you walk into the hearing planning to co-sponsor Representative Crockett's proposal?" Lieu answered honestly, "No, I had serious concerns. But her command of the legal issues and the safeguards she added convinced me this legislation is worth advancing with improvements we'll work on together." Nearby, Crockett spoke to another cluster of reporters with the same steady confidence she had shown in the hearing. "This isn't about personal dynamics or congressional seniority," she explained to MSNBC. "It's about crafting policy that can survive court scrutiny and real-world implementation." Congressman Lieu raised important questions, and the proposal will be stronger with his contributions. Within hours, clips from the exchange spread across social media, yet not in the usual way congressional confrontations go viral. Instead of angry outbursts or dramatic sound bites, people were sharing what many called a lesson in preparation, professionalism, and how Congress should operate. The hashtag Prepared Crockett began trending. Legal scholars and policy specialists joined in, praising how substantive and grounded the discussion had been. Georgetown law professor Paul Henderson even posted, "Just showed the Lieu-Crockett exchange to my constitutional law class as a real example of how policy development should look. Preparation, expertise, and constructive engagement in action." When was the last time Congress witnessed something like that? By the evening, political talk shows were already discussing the larger meaning of the exchange. On CNN's Anderson Cooper 360, analyst David Axelrod noted, "What made this moment stand out wasn't only Crockett's mastery of the material. It was her approach. She didn't react with irritation or defensiveness when her credentials were questioned. She simply displayed such strong expertise that the challenge stopped mattering." Even on Fox News, Laura Ingraham acknowledged Crockett's effectiveness, though from a different angle. "Democrats showed a level of policy seriousness today that Republicans should pay attention to. I don't support the proposal itself, but the preparation was real. If the GOP wants to counter these ideas, we need the same depth." Behind the scenes, political calculations were shifting quickly. Democratic leaders who had been cautious about moving forward with Crockett's ambitious proposal now recognized both its detailed structure and its bipartisan potential. The next morning, Speaker Hakeem Jeffries called Lieu and Crockett to his office. "This is exactly the kind of real legislating the public wants to see," Jeffries told them, according to a staffer. "We're giving this framework priority floor consideration, and I want both of you front and center as it moves forward." For Crockett, what followed was a significant rise in how she was viewed within Congress. Senior lawmakers who once dismissed her as another loud freshman member now sought her insights on legal questions tied to other bills. Committee chairs began setting aside time for her questions, instead of placing her at the tail end of hearings after the cameras were gone. Representative Crockett has shown something rare in politics, the ability to turn a challenge into an opportunity because she knows the material so well, said Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, one of the House's most respected legal figures. "That kind of expertise isn't tied to how long you've been here." For Lieu, the aftermath was more complicated but ultimately beneficial. While some initially saw his public reversal as a political misstep, many colleagues and voters respected his willingness to admit he was wrong and engage seriously. His chief of staff later reported that supportive calls outnumbered negative ones 9-1, with many praising him for putting policy above ego. 3 days after the hearing, Crockett and Lieu held a joint press conference announcing they had collaborated on an updated version of the police oversight proposal. The refined draft incorporated Lieu's concerns about implementation timelines while keeping Crockett's core accountability measures intact. "This is what lawmaking is supposed to look like," Lieu told the gathered reporters. "Different levels of experience working together to create policy that actually functions in real life." Crockett added, "Good ideas don't ask for congressional ID badges." Working together made this proposal stronger than anything we would have produced separately. The policy ripple effect extended beyond their own project. Several committee chairs began requiring members to demonstrate actual subject matter knowledge before taking the lead on major initiatives. This shift began to move Congress away from the old seniority-driven system. Some committees even launched expertise mapping to identify members with valuable professional backgrounds that weren't always obvious from their biographies. Media coverage of the partnership continued to highlight how unusual it was in modern Washington. The Washington Post editorial board wrote, "The Lieu-Crockett exchange shows what Congress could be if substance outweighed spectacle. For a short moment, the public saw a Congress more focused on governing than on performative conflict." Law schools and policy programs requested permission to use the footage in courses on how legislation is supposed to work. The Harvard Kennedy School even announced a case study titled "Beyond Credentials: Expertise in Policy Development in Congressional Dynamics," perhaps. The clearest sign of the exchange's impact came 2 weeks later at the next House Judiciary Committee hearing. When Crockett entered, members from both parties greeted her with respectful nods. When she spoke, the usual side chatter and phone checking that often filled hearings diminished noticeably. Members listened. Lieu, sitting nearby, paid close attention to her remarks on a different legal issue. When she finished, he leaned over and whispered something that made her smile. A hot mic caught part of it, prepared as always. "Glad we're on the same side now." What began as an attempt to sideline her had evolved into something rare in Washington: genuine respect between lawmakers of different generations and experience levels, based not on rank but on demonstrated expertise and substance. For those watching closely, the moment revealed how the legislative branch could function if performance politics were replaced by preparation and serious policymaking. Whether this would spark a broader shift or remain a singular event was uncertain, but for Jasmine Crockett, the outcome was unmistakable. She had taken a public challenge to her qualifications and turned it into proof not only that she belonged, but that she could elevate the discussion itself. She didn't just silence Lieu's initial doubts. She transformed the exchange into the start of a promising partnership aimed at producing stronger policy for the American public in a political environment that usually rewards conflict. This was perhaps the most unexpected victory of all. Thanks for watching our in-depth breakdown of how Jasmine Crockett turned Ted Lieu's challenge into one of Congress's most meaningful policy conversations. If you found this analysis helpful, be sure to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with anyone interested in how preparation and expertise can reshape political dialogue. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on whether this kind of substantive engagement could expand to other areas of congressional work.